Story 1. Hi Reddit. This is normally a subreddit I do not frequent, but lucky me, I have a story. A bit of info before going in that'll make sense later. I am a severe asthmatic and recently, I had to begin treatment to clear my airways of gunk. Currently taking medication to help, but it is causing a lot of chest pain on the side and causing a cough. I left home to go to work early in an attempt to see my girlfriend, but found myself out of my work drinks, so a Walmart trip was needed. I got ready and into my work uniform, a light blue shirt with my work logo and job title stitched to the upper left in clear white letters, pants and black shoes. I also had on a dark green sweat jacket because of the cold. I got to Walmart, roughly 10 o'clock, put my mask on and hurried in to get in and out. I hurry to the drink aisle and start looking for cherry soda. A lady comes up from behind me and grabs my arm and starts to pull. Lady, I have been looking for one of you jerks for 20 minutes. Now take me to the aisle where I can find the electronics item X. I, a bit taken aback, slide my arm out of her hand and politely inform I do not work at Walmart. She did not like that and started yelling about me being disrespectful and how I am dressed like I am an employee. I started paying little attention to her and found my drink. I start walking away, but this lady grabs me again and starts yelling louder. You little jerk, pay attention to me or you are going to hell. You better help me or I will go to your manager. I roll my eyes and say, Ma'am, as I said before, I do not work here. Please leave me alone. I am in a hurry. She did not like this. She yells, liar. I point at the words stitched on my shirt. She then lets me go and I think that's it. I say, I would help you find one, but I am in a hurry. I try to leave again, but she gets in front of me and says something that I don't recall, because next thing I know, she punched my chest hard. Struggling to breathe already, I black out and dropped the original drink. I come to in front of the store and the lady and the store manager were arguing, with the police already called. The manager noticed I was moving. Son, can you stay? The police are on the way. Are you okay? I struggle to answer and just try to catch my breath. I just look at the manager. The police come around that time. I am able to talk a bit, but get winded just talking. The manager shows the camera footage to the police, and I am asked if I wanted to press charges alongside the manager. I say, no, I have a bit going on. I just want to get my items and go. I know, stupid. The manager gets an employee to help me get my items. I see the puddle I made. I then get my items, pay and leave the store. Sadly, it was 10 minutes before my shift, so I had to go straight to work. Update. Putting this here for those who see this in the future. I called the Walmart and spoke to the manager, who gave me the officer contact information. I then contacted the officer and pressed charges. Explanation why I didn't at the time this happened: I couldn't breathe well. I also wanted to take the medication to get me stable as quickly as I could. I agree with y'all, I should have pressed charges immediately. Also yes, I am drinking the cherry soda because cherry cough syrup doesn't taste good, nor does it taste like cherry. Story 2. A bit of context. So this happened a long time ago, more than a decade ago, and this is not my story, but my brother's, cousin brother to be precise. But I love him just as if he is my real brother. And so the details might not be that accurate, but I will to provide you with everything I remember. Our beautiful cast. Entitled Teacher, My Brother, Nice Girl, and Supervisor. This incident happened right before the exam season. Before exams, the supervisors used to come and check whether the teachers had completed teaching their respective exam portions. This was basically so that they could ensure that the students were prepared for the exams or not. Now, on this particular auspicious day, one of the supervisors came to my brother's class and seated herself on one of the benches and started questioning the teacher present in the class at that moment about her portion. The teacher used to teach English or something, and this was her period, her teaching time. The conversation, if I remember correctly, went along something like this. Supervisor, have you completed the portion? Entitled Teacher. Yes, I have completed teaching the portion to the students. She basically started narrating the chapters she has completed, and all the other stuff which I won't get into right now. After this, the supervisor was convinced and was ready to go. But then my brother stepped in and exposed the lying teacher. You see, she hadn't completed the whole portion at all, and there were still things left to be taught. But she had decided to lie in front of the teacher so that she wouldn't have to face any criticism. The conversation between my brother and teacher went something like this. Brother, ma'am, I want to tell you something. Supervisor, sure, please go on. My brother started spitting out facts after facts and basically dropped a bomb. He showed her the chapters which she had not completed and also how she was lying about completing it. Meanwhile, the entitled teacher was chanting that she had completed the chapter, but the supervisor didn't believe her. I don't know if other children chimed and complained about her or not, but from what I could gather from my brother's story, he was the only one brave enough to stand up against the teacher. Now, after this, the supervisor left the class after thanking my brother for informing her. And before you guys ask, why didn't she confront the teacher? Well, I don't know. She probably didn't want to confront the teacher in front of the class and create a scene. Thus, she left. The entitled teacher then completed the leftover portion in a day, and then the real scene happened the next day. The very next day, when she entered my brother's class, she went berserk and started shouting at my brother and contradicting what my brother said yesterday, and they argued. Entitled teacher, why did you lie yesterday? I completed the whole portion. You lied. Brother, no, you didn't complete your portion, and we all know that. Yes, I did complete the portion. No, you did? And this was the moment when tragedy struck. She slapped my brother real hard and took all her anger out on my brother, and only one person in the entire class stood up for my brother. Nice girl. Hey, why did you slap him? We know that you didn't complete the portion, and now you are slapping him for telling the truth. Entitled teacher, shut up. Don't you dare talk to me like that, or you'll also get a taste of this. Sit down. Nothing really much happened to my brother, but she was transferred to a different branch, and there she created another controversy recently. Basically, at that school, she refused to give admission to a student on the basis that it was difficult to handle single-parent children and that they are difficult. Last I knew, she was jobless. Story 3. My husband and I are in our late 30s and have chosen to remain child-free. Some people in the child-free community suggested that I share this story here as well, so enjoy the saga. My husband and I spent nearly a decade saving up to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we finally took the plunge and relocated to our dream destination. The housing market here is incredibly expensive, comparable to places like Hawaii, so the best we could afford was half of a duplex. Despite the high cost, it is absolutely beautiful, right on the water, with designated space for our boat. Unfortunately, our neighbors in the other unit consist of Karen, her boyfriend Billy Bob, and her 3 extremely unruly children. The setup. For a while, we only visited for short stays, but now we live here full-time. The entire duplex was originally owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The 2 sides of the duplex are not identical. Ours is a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom unit, while the other side is a much smaller 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom unit. Our side of the property includes 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and approximately 150 feet of dock space, as we are on a corner lot. Meanwhile, the other side has a much smaller backyard, a patio, and only about 15 feet of dockage. The rental agreements clearly state that tenants are only entitled to their designated backyard spaces. However, since there were no fences, previous tenants had always shared the entire backyard. When we purchased the property, Karen immediately tried to assert that this arrangement should continue. I told her that if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her from time to time. She took this as permission to use our backyard whenever she pleased. The party incident. One day, my husband and I were enjoying drinks outside when a delivery truck pulled up to set up an enormous inflatable structure in our backyard. I asked Karen what she thought she was doing, and she casually informed me that it was her child's birthday party. Then, to make matters worse, she had the audacity to tell us that it was a private event for family and friends only, meaning we were expected to stay inside our house. Not wanting to be cruel and ruin a child's birthday, I decided to allow it this one time. However, I made it clear that after this, she would have no further access to our backyard. Karen simply shrugged and continued setting up for the party. During the event, a visibly intoxicated adult wandered into our home, shocking both us and our guests. When I told him that Karen's house was on the other side, he casually responded, "Oh, Karen said she owns the whole property and that we could use whichever bathroom was available." I directed him to Karen's bathroom, and shortly afterward, Karen stormed into our house, yelling at the top of her lungs about how we had embarrassed her in front of her guests. She ranted about how selfish we were for not even allowing her guests to use our bathroom, going as far as to say that we didn't deserve such a large space since it was just the two of us. At this point, I had enough. I told Karen to leave immediately or I would call the police. She eventually left, fuming, and the party wrapped up soon after. The backyard remodel. Following that incident, we realized that we needed to set clear boundaries. We decided to invest in building a fence and, while we were at it, upgrade our patio, add a fire pit, and install an outdoor kitchen. When the contractors arrived, Karen, being as nosy as ever, came outside to investigate. Since the fence would be the final part of the project, I chose to be vague and only mentioned the patio upgrade. Her eyes lit up clearly. She assumed that she would get to enjoy the improvements as well. When the workers finally began installing the fence, Karen came storming out, screaming at them to stop. I stepped outside and firmly told the workers to continue, then turned to Karen and told her to stay out of it. Of course, in classic Karen fashion, she called the police. What happened next was absolutely priceless. After I calmly explained the situation to the officers, making it clear that we were building a fence on our own property, with the full knowledge of the landlord who Karen was not, the police gave her a stern lecture. Karen's face turned red with anger, and when she went back inside, she slammed the sliding glass door so hard that it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence, but unfortunately, that was not the end of the drama. The boat incident. At some point, Billy Bob entered the picture, and he turned out to be just as bad as Karen. He began throwing cigarette butts and empty beer cans over our fence as a way to punish us for what he saw as disrespecting his girlfriend. I never expected to find people like him in what was supposed to be paradise, but Billy Bob was the textbook definition of the worst kind of neighbor. Billy Bob also had a boat, a 30-foot fishing vessel, to be precise. Since their unit only had 15 feet of dock space, it was nowhere near enough for his boat. Meanwhile, since we had ample dock space and only one boat, we rented out the extra dock spots on a month-to-month basis. If a renter failed to pay by the end of the month and their boat disappeared, we simply assumed they had moved on. One of our renters had their boat tied up near the property line, but Billy Bob wanted that space. While my husband and I were out of town, Karen and Billy Bob pretended to be us, told the renters to leave at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat in the spot. I only found out weeks later when the displaced renter left us a scathing review online, accusing us of being rude and going back on our verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was completely baffled and had no idea what they were talking about until I made a phone call and quickly pieced everything together. Furious, I called the police. When officers arrived, Karen and Billy Bob claimed that the boat was entirely on their property, which it wasn't. Then they changed their argument, saying that no one owns the water, which is true, but the seawall and dock space are deeded. When that failed, they resorted to calling us liars. At some point, Billy Bob became so enraged that he punched a police officer. Naturally, he was arrested on the spot. I felt bad for the officers who had to deal with him, so the next day, I brought them snacks and a note apologizing for the neighbor drama. I later won a small claims suit against Karen and Billy Bob for lost rental income, but unsurprisingly, I have yet to see a single cent from them. Thankfully, I was able to convince the displaced dock renters to return, offering them a few months of free docking as compensation. Final revenge. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Now, get ready for the most satisfying part. With the economy fluctuating, my husband and I were looking for smart ways to reinvest our savings when the perfect opportunity presented itself. The landlord who owned both units was in desperate need of cash and was tired of managing the property from over 2,000 miles away. Naturally, Karen being Karen, she had been calling him incessantly with complaints about every minor inconvenience, which only made him more eager to sell. His only condition was that we allow the poor single mother who had been his tenant for 8 years to finish out her lease, which was set to expire in July. Since we had the funds available and the ability to take over the property without a realtor or mortgage, the entire deal closed in under 2 weeks. Karen was aware that the property had changed ownership, as we registered it under a limited liability company, but she had no idea who the new landlord was. That is, until 8 days ago. I walked over to Karen's door and knocked. The moment she answered, she sneered and snapped, "What do you want?" But with some very colorful language. I simply smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her that rent was due by Friday. I even offered to accept her payment directly if that was more convenient. I have always heard stories about people's faces turning white with shock, but this was the first time I had actually seen it happen in real life. I then informed her that while we would be honoring her lease until the end of July, she needed to start making plans to move because we intended to remodel the unit before the next tenants arrived. The look of horror on her face was absolutely priceless. Final update. Not much has changed since then. Karen and her family's lease remains in effect until the end of July. So far, they have been paying rent on time, though I highly doubt it's out of respect for us. More likely, they are biding their time, hoping for some kind of miracle. As far as I know, she hasn't secured a new place yet, but that's not my problem. We served her an official 30-day notice stating that we will not be renewing the lease. To make things easier, we even offered to prorate July and waive the termination fee if they chose to leave early. Of course, Karen hasn't exactly become a model tenant. The near-weekly loud parties continue, and we had to call the police recently when her children were caught throwing lit fireworks at our boat. But at this point, we're just waiting out the clock. Come August, she will no longer be our problem. By Karen. Story 4. Karen gets mad at me for helping to bag groceries, acts crazy, almost punches my manager, and gets stopped, practically tackled, by an 80-year-old woman. Karen gets arrested. I used to work as a cashier in a supermarket. This story took place on my 4th day of work there and my 2nd day working at a register on my own, without a supervisor sitting next to me teaching me the ropes. Yes, I had only 2 days of training. I'm sure most of you will figure out which country I live in from the following explanation. It will become relevant later. Supermarkets in my country are chaotic on a regular day. However, Thursdays and Fridays are absolute mayhem and feel like a special kind of nightmare. On Fridays, the store closes 2 hours before sundown, as do most businesses in the country. During winter, this means closing around 2 p.m., and in summer, closer to 4:30 p.m. People get frantic on Fridays, trying to finish their shopping and get home in time to cook dinner. If you can avoid shopping on a Friday, please do so at all costs. I always told people that after this day. The reason Thursdays are just as hectic is that we get all the customers who don't want to deal with the Friday madness. Now, this was early evening on a Thursday, right at the peak of the shopping rush. The store was absolutely packed. We had 10 checkout lanes open, and every single one had at least 6 or 7 people waiting in line. Basically, if you were stuck with a slow cashier, there was nowhere else to go unless you had 10 items or fewer. Everything was going smoothly until a customer approached my register with 2 shopping carts full of groceries, mostly non-perishable items. And these were the large carts you find in big stores like Walmart in the United States. I later found out that he was buying these items for a community center in his neighborhood and stocked up their pantry twice a year. Nice guy. He greeted me very politely and then said the most dreaded words I could have heard that night. "This will be a delivery." Let me take a quick break from the story to explain why this was such a big deal, especially on a day like this. When a customer requests a delivery, the cashier has to call a store employee to assist with bagging the groceries. Normally, customers bag their own items, but in this case, the bagged groceries are placed in plastic crates, which are then stacked and taken to the storage area until delivery. A standard delivery usually involves 3 to 5 crates. Each crate receives a number, which I then have to manually enter into the system along with the customer's delivery address and phone number. After that, I have to print out the receipt, attach copies to the crates, and finalize the order. Even for a small delivery, this process always takes extra time. Now, back to the story. This customer had 2 fully loaded carts and wanted a delivery. I smiled and said, "Sure, no problem." Then, I turned to the rest of the line and let them know that this was a delivery order and that it might take a bit longer than usual. I also apologized for any delay it could cause. We always did this so that customers would be aware of the wait and could move to another register if they were in a hurry. That's when the entire line groaned in unison. I didn't blame them. There was nowhere else to go. I could see them craning their necks, checking out the other lines, but in the end, they all decided to stay. I started scanning items as quickly as possible. Even though it was only my 4th day, I was pretty good with numbers, so I had already memorized a lot of the product codes. Things were moving fast at first. Then, the bagger couldn't keep up. The area beside me, where I placed scanned items, quickly turned into a mountain of cans, bags of chips, and who knows what else. I literally couldn't scan another item because things were falling back onto my scale. I stopped and asked the customer if he needed help bagging. Both he and the bagger looked relieved, so I stepped in to help. After a few minutes, we cleared enough space for me to continue scanning. This cycle kept repeating. The area would fill up, I would stop to help bag, clear some space, and then resume scanning. And this is when she appeared. The Karen? She looked to be in her early 40s, with long brown hair, and at least physically she didn't fit the typical Karen image. But the way she stood, one hand on her hip, leaning so far to the side that I wondered how she was still upright, classic Karen stance. She was about 5 or 6 people back in my line. That's when it started. "Karen? Hello? What are you doing?" I didn't respond at first because I wasn't sure she was talking to me. I kept scanning. "Karen? Excuse me? What kind of cashier are you? Why aren't you doing your job? Stop being lazy and do your job." She was practically yelling at this point. Me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm just trying to." "Karen, that's not your job. You're a cashier. Do your job." Now, after reading so many stories online, I realized this would have been the perfect opportunity for some malicious compliance. I bet some of you wish I had done exactly what she wanted, just sat back, sipped my coffee, and refused to bag anything until the space was cleared. You know, be a cashier. But unfortunately, this was only my 4th day, and I wasn't that bold yet. Me. I'm just trying to move things along faster. If this is a problem, or if you're in a hurry, you're welcome to switch to another line. I'm sure another cashier would be happy to assist you. Now, I know that might sound rude in text, but I promise I said it nicely, with no sarcasm whatsoever. But, of course, it didn't help. Karen not listening at all. Just do your job. You are a cashier. What is wrong with you? Are you seriously this incompetent? You should be fired. At this point, I stopped paying attention and focused on scanning and bagging as fast as possible, knowing it wouldn't make a difference to her anyway. That's when I saw my manager, Joe, walking toward us. Joe was great. He always stood up for the employees. "Joe, what seems to be the problem?" Karen's still yelling. "Your cashier is awful. She's lazy and not doing her job. You should fire her. Tell her to do her job. She's not doing her job." She repeated that last part a few times like a broken record. Joe glanced at me for a moment, immediately understanding the situation. Then he turned back to Karen and said, "Joe, can't you see she's trying to help? She's making things move faster." Karen, however, was beyond reason. She started shouting even louder, her words turning into incomprehensible shrieks. Her face was red, spit was flying, and she was flailing her arms like a banshee. And that's when our unexpected hero entered the scene. An older woman, probably around 80 years old, started tapping Karen on the shoulder. It took a few tries, but eventually, Karen spun around with a furious look. "Nice old lady. Hey, Karen, excuse me, Karen." "Karen, what?" "Nice old lady, your daughter is crying." At that moment, the entire store seemed to go silent. It was like someone had pressed the mute button. The sea of people in front of me parted slightly, and we all looked down to see a little girl no older than 4 clutching her mother's leg, sobbing uncontrollably. Tears were streaming down her face, her nose was running, and she was hyperventilating. This poor child was absolutely terrified. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. So, that was my first encounter with a customer like that, but unfortunately, it was far from the last. Over the next year, I dealt with more than a few difficult customers, but none quite as extreme as her. I never saw her again, which made me wonder what happened after she was escorted out. Maybe she was banned from the store, or perhaps the whole incident embarrassed her so much that she never returned. Either way, I wasn't complaining. From that day forward, whenever I had a particularly bad customer, I would remind myself that at least they weren't trying to fight my manager in the middle of the store while being restrained by an elderly woman. That thought alone made most interactions seem far more manageable. Even after I moved on from that job, I still looked back on that day as one of the most chaotic shifts of my life. If nothing else, it gave me a story to tell. And let's be honest, it's not every day you see an 80-year-old woman physically restrain a furious customer in the middle of a packed supermarket. Story 5. In the early teens of this century, I was the chief information officer of a large organization in my country. As a result of my problem-solving skills, the managing director, let's call him Paul, once in a while added problematic departments to my responsibilities. I even ran the communications department for a while. My star within the organization was rising, and at a certain moment, I was informed that I would get a new office right next to Paul for easy access. I also struck up a good working relationship with the chief human resources, Harry, and one of the senior directors, Pete. We'd regularly huddle in so-called working meetings where we would drink coffee, discuss work, life, and watch hilarious YouTube videos. One of the topics that regularly came up was the meeting room situation. The board had decided that the meeting rooms were outsourced to a third party to rent out, and the third party paid a monthly fee. However, the third party charged us as well, so every time we wanted a staff meeting, we had to pay for the pleasure. This was a regular peeve, as every extra would cost money. The coffee on every floor was free of charge, except in the meeting rooms. The big supporter of this was our own chief financial officer, Mark. Much hated by all, he would check everyone's spending line by line and would hammer you on every mistake. But if his department made a mistake, he'd send an email along the lines of, "Mistakes will be made, deal with it." The man had 0 friends within the organization. During one of the management meetings, Mark went off on a totally off-topic rant concerning financial waste. Much sighing and irritated looks from all around. Paul, aware that we disliked Mark, did defend him by stating that we should cut back on spending and look at cheaper alternatives for everything. All of us concurred, we just wanted Mark to shut up. After the meeting, Harry and Pete walked up to me. "Go for lunch?" So we did. Harry started to say that he had gotten an idea. He explained it over lunch. Our eyes twinkled out of sheer maliciousness. Pete would talk to Paul to get him to agree on principle, without explaining the details, and we would execute our plans. A day later, Pete passed by my office and, broadly smiling, just said, "We have a go." And thus the wheels were set in motion. I write a mail to my departments that the next staff meeting will be held in a nice bar next to a lake, and that the drinks and snacks will be on the company. First, we will have a staff meeting, which I hope we can keep to the bare essentials, and afterward it's a free-for-all. Prospects are it will be sunny, so bring sunscreen and sunglasses. Arabs and beach balls are obligatory, office dress voluntary. If people want to swim afterwards, that's their choice. The positive reactions from employees are overwhelming. Harry has done it in his department as well, same result. In the next few days, a vibe goes through the departments. People are happy, motivated, and seem to be a bit giggly. The day arrives, sitting on a beach under a warm sun, with cold drinks in hand, because we're not barbarians. My staff and I work through the staff meeting in record time. All departmental heads have prepared written reports and distributed them via mail in advance. So the only thing I do is comments. No comments. Next item. The rest of the afternoon is seeing grown-up people behave like kids, splashing water all over the place, sunbathing, and enjoying a wine or beer. 2 days later, I am called into Mark's office. I walk in, doing my best impersonation of a saint, filled with an air of holy innocence. A vein on his beet red head is bulging. I position myself strategically at the meeting table so that I can duck when his head explodes. "What is this?" He throws down the bill for the staff meeting. I glance at it, €800 or thereabout for 30-odd people. Drinks, snacks, and the rental of some beach beds. Well within limits. That is a bill for my staff meeting. That's not a staff meeting, that is a staff outing, and that should be authorized in advance by Paul with a budget. No, that is a staff meeting. I would like to remind you that how and when I conduct my staff meetings is my sole responsibility. Furthermore, you emphasized during our last management meeting that we needed to cut back on costs and look for alternatives. So, I did. Let me ask you, if I rent a meeting room for 30-plus people here, half a day, with coffee and tea, a projection screen, access to the network, and a projector, how much does that come to? He does some quick calculations and comes to roughly €1,200. With an angelic face, I look at him. So, I saved about €400. Now what exactly is the problem? The way he contorts his face makes me fear we will have to get an ambulance. The meeting room rental is a source of income for us. We must support them. I will not stand for this. We are seeing Paul right now. Sure, whatever floats your boat. So off we go, and march into Paul's office. There Mark explains the whole affair, while I keep looking innocent. Paul lets me explain my side of the story, and I reference the calculation. Paul smiles. In my opinion, a very creative way to cut costs and enhance morale. I wish more people would think this way. And may I remind you, Mark, that it was you yourself who stated that we should look at everything. Maybe you should try it as well. With those words he makes a subtle gesture we all know means, you are dismissed. As we make our way out of the office, Paul calls me back. Oh, can you stay for a moment and close the door? I would like to discuss something with you. So, I close the door and sit down. Of course, Pete had already briefed me, and I personally signed off on it, as I really think it is creative and hilarious. I'll allow it, as it has a positive effect on employees. However, don't force Mark to have a heart attack. He is a bit of an A, I know, but he's also good at his work. So you don't mind if we yank his chain once in a while? Yank away, maybe he will loosen up. Well, aim. You also know that Harry has done the same. I know, I'm looking forward to the tantrum with the bulging vein already. He chuckles. At that exact moment, some pretty salty language makes its way through the door, and about as dry as a martini. Paul says, I think Harry's staff meeting bill has turned up. From that moment on, Paul became a regular participant in our working meetings. Our staff meetings became pretty well visited after that, with a soundtrack of the gnashing of teeth of one certain colleague.